Welcome to Asia Pacific Defence Reporter, your go-to source for cutting-edge security insights in the region. Get ready for rapid-fire analysis and commentary from the Asia Pacific with your host, Kim Bergman.
Hello and welcome back. I'm going to start with a quick update about the security treaty between Australia and Papua New Guinea, because in my last podcast I expressed surprise that there had been a delay with that. It looked a little bit sloppy. Anyway, that it has now happened on October the 6th here in Canberra. Our Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and the PNG Prime Minister James Marape have signed the document. Now, as I understand it, it's not a full treaty. It's more sort of like heads of agreement. That's all I've been able to find on the internet, and I'll just counter through those because it won't take long. The first point is this is a mutual defence alliance which recognises that an armed attack on Australia or Papua New Guinea would be a danger to the peace and security of both countries. Yeah, I guess that's a sort of mutual assistance kind of thing. Then expansion and modernisation of our defence relationship, including by setting out our shared ambition to establish a recruitment pathway for PNG citizens into the Australian Defence Force. Now, given our well-known recruiting problems, I don't have any difficulty with that. That seems sensible. Then strengthening and expanding defence cooperation through enhanced capability, interoperability and integration. Again, fine in principle. PNG does not really have a lot of defence hardware where that applies, but I'll come back to that. Then ensuring any activities, agreements or arrangements with third parties would not compromise the ability of either of the parties to implement the treaty. Now, a lot of the interpretation of that has been PNG wanted the right to continue to deal with China, to not be inhibited in that relationship at all. That's fine. It could also, I suppose, be an indirect reference to Australia and AUKUS, that we're not going to alter that just because of the sensitivities of other people in the region. And the final point was reaffirming both countries' absolute respect for our neighbours' sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity. Yep, again, fine, no problem with that. So overall, this seems to be, a reasonable way forward, but I'd just like to make a couple of points. Everyone in Australia seems to think that this is a good idea. Well, that's a view not universally shared in Papua New Guinea, and there's still a little way to go in all of this. The PNG Parliament has to ratify the treaty, as does the Australian Parliament, by the way. We'll rubber stamp it. The situation in PNG is not that clear because there's a bit of resentment that this has all happened at a bit of a rush. There hasn't been a great deal of debate, apparently. I'm not an expert on PNG. I'm just repeating what I've been told, and that might cause a little bit of friction. The problem that I can see from an Australian viewpoint is that hypothetically it would leave the door open to Australia being drawn into a clash with Indonesia. The border between PNG and Indonesia, geographically West Irian, and that's been an on and off flashpoint since West Irian became part of Indonesia in 1963. That in itself is a sort of long and messy story. Indonesia became independent after about 300 years of Dutch colonialism. That happened a couple of years at the end of the Second World War, but West Irian remained under Dutch administration until 1963. Anyway, there have been insurgent movements in the area since that time. And I just flag it as a potential flashpoint. Now, Indonesia certainly doesn't want a conflict. PNG doesn't want a conflict, but it's just one of those areas that is slightly unpredictable, and it's not the sort of thing that Australia would want to be accidentally drawn into either. Now, another bit about the treaty that is causing a little bit of concern in PNG is whether this sort of military-to-military cooperation is really the best use of resources for both countries, because PNG does face a number of security problems, but most of those are internal, tribal conflicts in particular, and also problems with crime, with various illegal activities, such as illegal logging and illegal fishing, which is costing their small economy significant amounts of money every year. So the question is, would it not be better to focus on strengthening PNG's police force rather than strengthening PNG's army? Anyway, I'm sure that a lot of people much wiser than me have already contemplated all of this and have figured out the best way forward. Again, I just thought it was important after my last podcast to update the situation. Now, in the relentless publishing cycle, the October edition of Asia Pacific Defence Reporter is about to go out. It happens a bit later in the week than normal for complex reasons that I won't trouble anyone with. And it has updates on a number of naval projects, because this is the edition of the magazine that's geared towards a very large naval maritime conference in Sydney in early November. I imagine some listeners will be going to that, so please have a look. It's free. It'll be online, and we've used the opportunity to update various naval programs, the Hunter-class frigate. I wrote a short update on Ghost Shark, unconnected with naval stuff. You'll find my article about Xinjiang, and as I mentioned, I'm going to do a couple of separate podcasts on that. And also I've had a few more words about AUKUS. I can hear some people groaning, not AUKUS again, not more about nuclear-powered submarines, but there's a good reason for that. Again, as I've touched on previously, there's been, again, a brief upsurge in sort of AUKUS boosterism from a number of people, mainly in Australia, but also in the United States, saying, yes, it's all fine, it's all going to happen. Trump and Hegseth and Rubio are all on board. Well, and again, I simply point out the bleeding obvious, that, yeah, there are very good reasons for them to be on board at the moment. We have money being given by Australia to the US, also the UK. I've touched on that. But possibly even more importantly, in the minds of the Americans, and this is largely speculative on my part, but I'll mention it anyway, some of our officials getting a little bit nervous about the US review into AUKUS have spoken about the possibility that if the US won't go ahead with the sale of second-hand Virginia-class submarines to us, maybe we will reconsider all of the money that's being poured into the as in poured concrete as well as pouring money into a major upgrade of the HMAS Sterling naval base south of Perth, so that 4 US Virginia-class submarines can be parked there. Anyway, they've raised the possibility maybe Australia should think again when it comes to the very generous amount of financial support that we're giving to that project, if the United States is getting cold feet about the sale of nuclear-powered submarines to us. So the obvious logical thing for the Americans, if they are in any way concerned about the Australian position is to just look at the huge mismatch of timelines. The work at HMAS Sterling is due to be completed in 2027. There are rumours that there are schedule problems there. I don't know. In Australia, we frequently have schedule problems, particularly with anything connected with infrastructure, but we'll keep an eye on that. So Sterling is meant to be completed in 2027, but the decision on the sale of nuclear-powered submarines will not have to be taken by a future US president until 2029 at the earliest, and possibly 2031. So it seems as clear as day to me that it's very much in the interests of the Americans, in the light of these noises coming from Australian officials, to once again assert that they're fully in support of AUKUS. It costs them nothing. They continue to receive Australian cash. The redevelopment of HMAS Sterling is completed. They park their Virginia-class submarines here. That makes life a little bit more difficult for Chinese targeters, that they've got another place that they'll now have to drop 1 or 2 nuclear weapons on, so that achieves the US objective, and it still leaves the door open for the future US president to say, no thanks, the deal doesn't suit us. Now, we're hardly going to turn around and then demolish the upgraded HMAS Sterling. It presumably just remains as a base for US submarines. And just on that one, my final thought, I was speaking with an ex-politician of some seniority. It was a private conversation, so I won't mention their name, who pointed out, again, the bleeding obvious about this deal requiring the approval of a future US president. I mean, it's possible that Donald Trump will still be there, but anyway, that's a side issue. Who pointed out that even if, by some miracle, the US can dramatically lift the build rate of Virginia-class submarines to 10 per year, the door is still open for a future president to say, no, it is still not in the interests of the US to transfer any of the submarines to Australia. You can read all about that if you wish. Now, while I'm talking about the United States, I had a few more thoughts as well on the September 30th meeting that I've mentioned, where US Secretary of War Peter Hegseth, apparently that's incorrect. He apparently is still the Secretary of Defense, even though he's announced and Donald Trump has announced that he will be known as the Secretary of War. For the name change to be official, it has to pass through Congress, so that hasn't happened yet. Anyway, their September 30th meeting with the 800 top military figures at the Marine base in Quantico, pretty extraordinary stuff. I couldn't bear watching the entire speeches by both Hegseth and Trump, but the message from them both was extremely clear, and that is, when it comes to the US military, only Christian nationalist white men are suitable for service. Everyone else can forget it. And I wonder what that will do for recruitment in the United States, with that brutal message being delivered very publicly and repeatedly. And that led to me having the thought, which I've put in my next editorial, about what are going to be the consequences if the Australian military culture and the US military culture diverge markedly. I mean, already there are cultural differences, but we, speak sort of the same language and have a number of values in common. But what happens if the US becomes more radical, if more and more people are appointed not for their competence, but for their political loyalties? Will the two military organizations be able to continue to work effectively together? I don't know. I genuinely don't know the answer to that, and I'd be interested in the thoughts of other people. I mean, we do interact with other countries that have different cultures, Japan, South Korea, France, but their military systems all seem to be entirely professional, with people being promoted kind of on merit. The United States appears to be the odd one out. Not yet, but in terms of trend, it looks like they will be the odd one out. And I will remark that there was one former Australian service chief, who I won't name, who had morning prayer sessions in their office. And the suggestion was that if you wanted to be promoted, you had better, turn up and do your Christian God-fearing duty. I'm not sure how widespread that was. Anyway, we seem to be substantially different from the way the US is going, and I wonder what the consequences will be. Now, I mentioned Xinjiang, and I'll also make the not unique observation that Trump seems determined to give away the US lead in terms of military capability and science and technology to China. And again, the consequences of that, I think, are going to be profound. They're not going to be felt immediately, but they will be felt in the medium term, 3 years out, 5 years out, that sort of thing, as research budgets across the US are being cut. Some of it is in areas like, medical technology, putting an end to cancer research. I can't understand why anyone in their right mind would do that. But it also, flows through into engineering and science, attacks on foreign students, where foreign students, rather than remaining in the United States and continuing their professional careers there, are now in increasing numbers returning to their home countries. This is, again, going to have profound impacts, I think, on the ability of the United States to continue to lead in areas of military technology. And again, this is a repeat theme of mine. I really think we are overdue for a correction when it comes to procurement. We need to reorient ourselves towards South Korea, Japan, Europe, maybe some other players. Singapore, don't ignore Singapore. They also want to collaborate with us. And a final thought on the state of the US, and this is again just sort of an aside. The US is running out of electricity, and again, that's the ignorance, I would say, of President Trump and his administration and their war on renewables. And why does it matter? Well, artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is very important for military applications, for autonomy. You need electricity and lots of it to power data centers. The US electricity grid, like a lot of their infrastructure, is old and creaking. It's having difficulty coping with current demands. There is no way with the current energy policy settings that the US will have nearly enough electricity to be able to support the expansion needed in data centers. The quickest and cheapest way of bringing electricity online is through wind and solar. Doesn't matter what your ideological beliefs are, that's simply a fact. That's why China is investing so heavily in that. The US is going in the opposite direction, with the Trump administration actively interfering in the approvals process for renewables and instead putting money into the coal industry and trying to encourage the development of coal-fired power stations, which are going to take between 7 and 10 years to build, if they ever happen. So the US is losing that particular race as well. And we had a couple of, or at least one notable event, the arrival of Australia's first 2 Apache helicopters. I have my own strong feelings about that. I continued to worry that the ADF is preparing now for the wrong war. They are preparing for conflicts of the 20th century, not the 21st century. Russia and Ukraine have stopped using attack helicopters because their mission can be performed more effectively and much more cheaply by drones. Other countries are reorienting their helicopter fleets as a consequence of what they can see happening and advances in technology. Australia is not. I'll have a bit more to say about that in the next episode. Okay, out of time. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye for now, and please keep an ear open for the Xinjiang specials. They will be in mid-October. Thanks again.
That's today's Asia-Pacific Defence Reporter. For more in-depth articles, expert opinions and exclusive interviews, visit AsiaPacificDefenceReporter.com. Stay informed, stay ahead. This is your source for all things defence. Until next time.